I'll introduce myself. My name is Stephanie Quinn, and I've been a resident of Cameron Park, Shingle Springs. I've gone back and forth for the last 22 years. Raised my boys here. They went to high school at Ponderosa, and I love this community. Probably like you, I got very engaged in politics this year. I found myself to be an empty nester in the fall. Both my boys went off to college. And I found myself, sitting at home after work and watching the news and kind of being on a pity potty. And I knew that really wasn't my nature, that I needed to do something. So in the fall, I think it was late fall, I went to a debate that Regina Bateson here, our top congressional candidate, she participated. And little did I know it would really be the only debate I would see, because unfortunately her primary opponent just keeps declining to debate her. And if you know Regina, you know why nobody would want to debate her. So I can't fault Jessica for that, but the problem is it really robs the voters in this district to get into the nitty-gritty and find out what the policy positions are of our candidates, to get to know them personally. So we're having to go out and do these meet and greets and town halls and just get Regina out. I hosted a house party, and we had about 70 people there who had never met her before. They were all sold on her by the time we left. A little bit about myself. I'm a former journalist, so I am very particular about candidates I'm going to support. And I went into this forum in Cameron Park in late fall thinking, I've got media skills, so I can donate those to a candidate if I think they stand a chance against McClintock. There was only one who stood out to me in that forum. And within about 15 minutes, I was handing my cell phone number over to her campaign manager. So I can't tell you enough how she has passed the litmus test for me and others in this district over and over again. There isn't a question she can't answer. There isn't a question she's going to dodge. So all of you have index cards in front of you. If you will fill those out, I have a few in my hands right now. After Regina talks a little bit about herself and what she stands for, just raise your card and I'll come and get it, okay? Really appreciate you all being here tonight. If you're on Facebook, make sure you take a picture, or even if you don't, do a check-in. Let people know what you're up to, because it's really important that your neighbors, your friends and family are registered to vote. You can still register to vote right up till May 21st, and that you vote on June 5th, okay? But we're going to be okay.
Can I say something about her?
Sure.
Her dad was the leader in our local Democratic Party, and he was the founder and the total energy beside running our local essay contest for the high school students here for many years before his passing. And you're doing him proud.
Love my dad. Okay, then we'll turn it over to Regina.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. If you can't hear, let me know. Or if we get complaints from anybody online that they can't hear, there's a little bit of background noise here. So I'll do my best, and I apologize if I'm kind of shouting at you if you're in the front of the room here. So I'll just introduce myself really briefly. I know we have some people here who have been out to a lot of events before, have been volunteering for the campaign. Other people are completely new though. So I want to start at the beginning. My name's Regina Bateson. I'm from Roseville, so just sort of down the hill over on the other side of Folsom Lake. And I grew up there, went to our public schools, and I'm really grateful for the investments that our community made in me. I learned the value of hard work, so I had all my first jobs here in the area, doing food service, umpiring, retail sales. Then I was able to go off to college, and I went to Stanford and graduated shortly after 9/11 and then joined the Foreign Service. And after working in Washington, D.C. and in Latin America, then I went back to school and got my PhD and ended up teaching at the university level. But I stepped away from that to run for Congress against Tom McClintock, because I think this is the year he can be beaten. I think it really matters for our community, and it really matters for our country. So I've actually been at this for about a year now, more than a year, and have really run a very grassroots campaign. And I'll tell you that a lot of people thought I was kind of crazy when I got started doing this. I really was pushed over the edge by a Tom McClintock town hall last spring at Dorado High School. That was the thing that broke the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And I left that town hall and just felt, why is it that that man had the microphone? There were hundreds of really good people in this gymnasium, really capable people, smart people, educators, business owners. My aunt actually lives in Cameron Park, was there that day. My mom was there and asked him a question which he did not answer in a satisfactory way. And I just thought, why is it that he's got the microphone? And the answer is basically that people have not run against him in years in an effective way, and people haven't had a real choice here. So I made a little website that very same night. One of my old high school teachers had been trying to push me and encourage me to run, and after the town hall, I kind of decided to explore the idea. And very quickly the website went viral in our district. And people came out of the woodwork and started writing positive comments on it, donating small amounts of money. Pretty soon thousands of people had seen it. And that was how the campaign got started. It was really with support from the community here. And that's always been the strength of our campaign. We have over 900 people signed up as volunteers, and about 300 or 400 who are very active volunteers right now. We've had the highest percentages of our fundraising in our district and in small dollar contributions of anybody who's in the race here. I think that that's the type of campaign we need to run to beat Tom McClintock. You're not going to win here by being super partisan, particularly if you're a Democrat. You need to be showing people, I think, that you're really engaged with the community and you're going to do what's right for the community and be a strong, independent voice for us in Congress. So that's my orientation to this. My priorities are really fighting for the practical needs of people here. So good paying jobs, high quality, affordable health care, protecting our great outdoors, making sure we have a clean, safe, healthy environment to be living in, and of course investing in education. Because that's an area where Republicans and Democrats really agree that if we don't have great public schools, how can you say to someone, go get your education, go pull yourself up by your bootstraps? So that's a very little bit about me. I really want to give you all the opportunity to ask your questions, though. I know Stephanie's got an organized format here with note cards, but again, this is a pretty small group, so if you feel like there's something you really want to follow up on or something that's closely related, I'm okay with you kind of putting your hand up and wanting to follow up on something. That's totally fine.
Yeah, and if something comes after we get done with the cards, I think we can go ahead and take some questions.
Yeah, or comments.
Or comments, yeah. Okay, so Regina, the first question is, what are your major differences that you see in your political views as compared to me?
Okay, so let's maybe do it louder. So what are my major differences in my political views versus Tom McClintock's? There are a lot.
We have a month.
There goes the hour.
So I would say that the most fundamental difference between us is that when Tom McClintock thinks about government and what government should do, I think that there's one word that guides his thinking, and that's no. He basically thinks that government should not do hardly anything and is opposed to almost all government programs, government spending of any kind, no matter how much is a smart investment in our community. And that orientation toward no, I don't want to see our government doing anything, is really a huge roadblock to our local governments. I had a really interesting conversation with a local elected official recently who's not a Democrat, but he was saying the thing that really frustrates him about McClintock is that you just get back no. If you're trying to have a very basic conversation about, can we invest in some flood prevention so that our town does not flood in the same way? This is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is about not being underwater. And you just get back no. Whereas the conversation should really be how. Like, how do we go about that? How do we do that in the most effective way possible or the most efficient way possible? So I would say that's the basic difference in orientation between me and McClintock, is that my orientation is how can we make wise decisions to use our taxpayer dollars in smart ways to really invest in the community, make sure that we're progressing, and in some ways very fiscally responsible. But I think if you start with no, you're not going to get ahead. You're not going to see the kind of investments we need here. Very quickly, I would also say that my loyalty to and investment in the community is very different than McClintock's. So Tom McClintock is in this seat right now because of his own political ambition. He's a career politician. He's from Southern California. He got termed out of the state legislature, where he'd been representing Southern California for decades. and this seat became open in the same year. That is the entire reason why he came over here and ran here. He needed something else to do with himself, and he just kind of flopped on top of us for that reason. You know, I'm actually from the community. I'm really committed to trying to see us grow and prosper, and I'm really loyal to people here and want to be that good partner. So I really care about constituent services. I would do 10 town halls a year if elected, at least one in each of our counties, to make sure people can really have a conversation back and forth. I would open 2 offices. So right now, the southern part of our district is not well served by Tom McClintock. People who live there might be 4 hours or 5 hours away from his office in Roseville. So, you know, I think I would really be much more oriented towards serving the community.
And he still doesn't live in the district, right?
No, he doesn't. He still lives in Elk Grove. He's still never bothered to move here.
Healthcare reform. Probably another area different from.
Is there a question, or is it just
Yeah.
kind of a comment? There's a lot we can say about healthcare.
What are your thoughts about healthcare reform?
All right. So, you know, when it comes to healthcare, I think right now we have an absolute emergency at the federal level. You know, we have a federal government that is trying to take care away from people and make it more expensive for everyone else. I think the first thing we need to do is stabilize the individual insurance market. Because Trump cut off some of the payments that were supposed to have gone to insurance companies last year, premiums have actually gone up for everyone. Some of the estimates are that it could be as much as 18%. As much as an 18% increase is attributable just to that one decision. And so I think we need to have legislation to restore those basic payments, to restore some stability to the insurance market, which will immediately help to bring down prices at least a little bit. I think that we need to be negotiating for prescription drug prices, especially when it comes to Medicare. That's an obvious way to go after some savings, and there's a decent amount of Republican buy-in on that. And I think that we need to be expanding coverage, getting more people covered, and bringing down prices, especially for people who are self-employed and are actually buying their own insurance through Covered California, you know, in our state here. In terms of expanding coverage, you know, I think that the most realistic way I can see to do that at the federal level is to invest in stabilizing our insurance markets and then add in a public option. And make sure that there's a good, high-quality option that everyone can buy into if they want to. But I absolutely think that healthcare is a right. I think it's a necessity. I think it's a crime that the wealthiest country in the world can't manage to provide basic care to its own people. But my thought at the federal level is that we need to be thinking realistically about how we can do the most good for the most people in the shortest amount of time possible. And so that's my take on it. But I'm a very pragmatic person. And so if some really smart healthcare economist out there comes up with another idea to get more people covered more quickly with better quality and lower prices, my ears are very open. But I think the first step is definitely stopping the attacks on healthcare and stabilizing the individual insurance markets.
Next question, gun control. What would you do?
All right. So, you know, I've been asked a lot, do I respect the Second Amendment? Yes. I also respect the rights of responsible gun owners here in our district, of whom there are a lot. But I think we can all agree we need to do more to keep our kids safe and to keep our country safe. So I think the top 2 things we should do at the federal level are really implement universal background checks. More than 90% of Americans agree with that. About 74% of NRA members actually agree as well. You know, and it wouldn't really change much for the experience of gun owners here in our district because California already has a really robust background check system. But I do think that we need federal legislation to expand those standards nationwide and to close some loopholes, like the gun show loophole, for example. And I do favor reviving the federal ban on assault weapons. I think that there's no reason why we should have literally weapons of mass destruction in the hands of civilians and in some cases being used against our children in their schools. Those are the top 2 things I would do.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
How would you fight against it? How would you work against the huge NRA lobby?
Yeah, so the question was, how would I work against the huge NRA lobby? I actually think the most important thing we can do to reduce the absolute grip that the NRA has over Congress is to change who's in Congress. So Tom McClintock takes an enormous amount of money from the NRA, for example. I think that going and beating him and the sea change that we might see in other districts around the country actually means that 2018 could fundamentally upend their control over Congress. You know, if we really see a number of NRA-backed legislators lose their seats, and get replaced by normal common sense people who aren't tied in with the NRA. I think that's probably the most effective thing to do, because when you're in the realm of trying to negotiate with people who are legislators who already have strong relationships with them, that hasn't proven very effective at all. I mean, you saw even with the discussion of bump stocks, at the very beginning of that conversation, I believe you even had Paul Ryan saying, hey, banning bump stocks, not a bad idea. This seems reasonable. And then all of a sudden, you saw this wild backpedaling among Republicans in Congress. And I'm not sure, but I kind of attribute that to the NRA's influence of lobbying that happens. I mean, there's no other explanation really. And so, I think, again, we just have to recognize that their control is very tight over some legislators. So I think the answer is to boot those folks out and to elect some new people to take their place.
Okay.
Yeah,
Another follow-up?
I'm fine with that, sure.
We have to go and renew our driver's license. We have to take tests to prove that we know the rules of the road. But once you do a background check for gun ownership, then you can buy guns.
You don't ever have to do that again, yeah.
And people change, situations change. Even the simplest, natural occurrences can change, leaving people, there was a good article in the Dorado about people with dementia and what doctors need to do to have that discussion with them. Would you feel comfortable backing not just a registered license to have guns, but have it something that would have to be re-upped?
Yeah, so what I'm referring to when I talk about universal background checks is a background check at the point of sale for every transaction. So if you are going to a vendor, you're going to a store, you're buying a gun, maybe you bought a gun 5 years ago, but then you go and buy another one 5 years later, they would rerun your background check. And I actually think we really do need to invest in making sure that our background check systems are getting the right information inputted into them. Because like in the case in Texas, in the really tragic church shooting, it turned out that the shooter actually had, I believe, domestic violence charges or allegations against him from time in the military, and that information should have been fed into the background check system but wasn't. So I do think it's very important that the background check system be getting updated continuously with new information, because someone might not have done anything 5 years ago, and then maybe they have a domestic violence conviction now 5 years later when they want to go buy another firearm. In terms of further sort of measures, I know the state of California is talking about some other measures related to mental health and things. A fair amount of that can be handled at the state level, and I think we do have to be really realistic that at the federal level, this is one of the hardest areas to push forward on legislation. It just is. And again, the bump stock thing basically died, and that's the most common sense you can start with. So I think we have to be really strategic at the federal level, and so my top two priorities are the things that I think would have the biggest impact. And really, just getting a universal background check system in place in the first place, I think would be a huge victory, frankly, and it's going to take a lot of work. So that's my first priority. I would be surprised if we got down to priority 3 or 4 or 5 within a 2-year term. So I would say let's talk after we have universal background checks in place and we have a federal assault weapons ban back, and then we can think about the next steps at the federal level. In the meanwhile, I think doing things like that at the state level is perfectly appropriate, and a lot of states do move forward with those kinds of measures and allow us to see what's effective and how they really work, and then potentially scale up from there.
I think a lot of folks don't realize, we live in California, but most states are nowhere near as up on gun control as we are. So we have to get them up to at least the level that Regina is talking about. And that's the practical side of it, I think, is not to bite up more than you can chew at this point. Okay, so next question. Our current rep is a strong advocate of a dam on the North Fork of the American River and seems to be doing all he can do to get it built. What is your position on the dam? And assuming you oppose it, what will you do to permanently kill it?
All right, so I'm going to list the name of the project in particular.
Auburn Dam.
Oh, Auburn Dam. Okay. All right. Just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing.
That process.
Yeah. Yes, so the very first political question I ever asked in a public forum when I was 13 years old was about the Auburn Dam. I have been opposed to the Auburn
Tells you how long
Dam
it's been a
my
lie.
entire life. And actually that was when I first went to Washington, D.C. The first time ever was when I was in 8th grade. And my junior high school, Cabot Junior High, has this 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. We got to go see John Doolittle, and it was a very hot day. We were outside the Capitol, and he actually came out and talked to us. My understanding is that McClintock won't actually meet with our groups of students anymore, which I think is outrageous. But John Doolittle at least took the time. I remember he was very polite, he was very courteous to us, he was very respectful. And you know, I actually have pictures from this taken on my little disposable camera from back then, from my perspective as a little 8th grader sitting on the grass, looking up at John Doolittle in his suit. But I threw my hand up there, and I said, I'm opposed to the Auburn Dam. Why do you support this? And he gave some answer. I mean, I really disagreed with it. So I definitely oppose the Auburn Dam. My understanding is that, you know, I thought the proposal was pretty well dead and not advancing. I certainly haven't seen any active pressure for it. McClintock's current project he's favoring seems to be expanding Shasta, actually, which I'm also not convinced is a good idea. Yeah, but I'm a strong proponent of the Auburn Dam.
Okay, good. One more McClintock question. He wants to defund Amtrak. What are your views?
No. I mean, to the contrary, you know, I'll tell you that I am a little frustrated by some of the priorities around rail projects in California right now, because there's a lot of money being invested in north-south connectivity along the coast, and you're basically connecting one wealthy area with another wealthy area. We know that a lot of the commuting patterns in California are east-west. You know, I'll tell you, I was mentioning that my aunt and uncle live in Cameron Park. My uncle still partially commutes to the Bay Area, and that's not uncommon. We have a lot of people leaving Roseville at 4 in the morning, going to the Bay Area, going 1 day a week, 2 days a week. You know, people who are moving out here and kind of telecommuting, but still tied to jobs there, or certainly jobs in Sacramento, jobs in Davis. So I actually am really excited about the idea of trying to add a third line of track to the Capitol Corridor. The right-of-way already exists and is already actually secured. And you could go I mean, my understanding is that you could go from one full trip, right now there's only one full trip really, from Auburn that goes down through Rockland, down through Roseville, to Sacramento, to Davis, into the Bay Area, and then goes back again. You could go up to maybe 10 trips a day. And that would really open up a lot more commuting and take a lot of pressure off our roads, and frankly really be an improvement in quality of life. Wouldn't exactly hit Highway 50 yet, but I think that, you know, if we're going to make some investments in rail, I mean, that seems to make a lot of sense. It's something that local governments are very excited about over there on that corridor. You know, I'll admit that the fact there's only one trip a day also does affect our family right now, because my husband teaches at UC Davis 1 day a week, and his class ends at 5 p.m. The only train back to the Roseville and then Auburn areas is at, well, it's at 5:03 p.m. is when it leaves Davis. And so there's no way he can get from, you know, his classroom to go jump on that train. And if he could just sit there happily for half an hour, be peaceful, be quiet, be relaxed, you know, get off and then even ride his bike on the other end or drive home or something. But because there's just that one trip a day, you know, it can't work. And so I think that there's really an opportunity there to take something that already exists, that's already very popular, and expand it in a way that makes sense.
Okay, next question, and I'm sorry to be sitting down a little bit. If you were to sponsor legislation, what would you want to sponsor?
That's a good one. You know, realistically, as a freshman in Congress, you're often going to end up co-sponsoring, I think, at most. But I think we've got some real needs here. I mean, I would love to put in place stronger incentives to get telecom companies building rural internet out. So making sure that we have high-speed broadband out into more of our rural communities. There are some changes that we can make to really incentivize that. So that is a big priority for me. You know, I think that getting more funding for wildfire prevention that's targeted at communities. You know, I like the bill that Maria Cantwell has out right now that does take some of our fire prevention funding and actually target it at the most at-risk communities. rather than being so focused toward the backcountry. But I really think we need to do more when it comes to fire prevention, to flip around the emphasis and actually start where the people are, start with the structures, and really support people in getting their defensible space taken care of, put in place strong incentives, tax incentives to allow people to replace their roofs with fire-resistant roofing, fire-resistant siding, put guards on the vents to their attics, and then gutter guards. Those are the 4 things that, does anyone have those 4 things on their house right now who's here? No, exactly. And I bet that a lot of you live in fire risk or semi-fire prone areas, just based on who I was talking to before. And I mean, I'll tell you, this might seem astounding, but if you do those 4 things to your house, and you have your defensible space, most houses can survive almost any kind of fire that's going to come through. And they've actually seen this. LA County has pretty strict standards, and especially around new construction there, they've actually seen whole neighborhoods survive really intense fires when they're built to those specifications. I mean, I was talking to somebody who had actually done, some of the design consulting and then some of the inspections after a large fire there that came through a community that was right on the edge of a canyon. And out of this whole development, there was only one house that burned down. And they were really kind of puzzled, like, why did this one house burn down when it was built apparently the same way as all the rest? And the answer was that the owners had installed a dog door on their kitchen door. And so the investigators figured that during the fire, the wind blew open the dog door and embers went into the house and actually burned it down from the inside out. But I think that kind of thinking, I mean, it's impressive that the rest of the houses survived. And so I think that we need to flip around more fire prevention funding, to be supporting homeowners in making those changes, and to be dedicating more of the funding in the fire prevention to the places people live, rather than so much to the backcountry. So I would be very interested in trying to take Tom's place on the House Natural Resources Committee, and actually co-sponsor legislation to try to make that change in how we allocate the fire prevention funding.
You just answered the next question, but maybe there's another congressional House committee you would like to serve on in addition to that.
That's right, education in the workforce. So my top 2 choices would be the House Natural Resources Committee, because so much of our district is federal land, and then the Committee on Education in the Workforce, because I think, again, that really matters, and it's an area where I have some expertise, having worked in higher education before.
What are the top 10 contributors to your campaign, individuals and/or corporations?
Okay, top 10. So the question was, what are the top 10 contributors to your campaign, either individuals or corporations? Parts of that question are easy to answer. So there are no corporate donations to our campaign. We also have no PAC money, which is unique in this race right now, and a distinction from, I'd say the other most competitive Democrat who's running. Our campaign is much more grassroots, much more centered on small dollar donors from inside our district here. In terms of the top 10 individuals, I actually don't really know off the top of my head. I can tell you that there's a couple from Penryn, there's a couple from Truckee, there's another couple from Truckee, someone I know from high school, from Granite Bay, who now lives in New York, but still spends a lot of time back here. We actually don't have very many donors to our campaign who are maxed out, is the phrase. So if you look at our FEC reports, this is another strong difference, between me and the other main Democrat running, is that, the maximum amount of money that an individual can give to a campaign is $5,400. There are very few people who've given that amount of money to our campaign. You can go search our FEC report and see for yourself. It's a strong contrast. You can see me trying to fill out even 2 hands worth of people in that category. Another couple that owns a house in Squaw Valley. I actually can't think of more maxed out donors. So I don't know if you have other people you remember, Emma.
They're mostly individuals, couples, but our campaign is, I think last time I checked, like 80% small dollar donations under $250.
I actually don't know off the top of my head. I would recommend looking at opensecrets.org because they break down the percentages of the different campaigns. So they break down for you. It's opensecrets.org. And you can just search for CAO4, and then you can click through and they compare for you all the candidates and their percentage of small dollar donations versus large donations, in district versus out of district, all that kind of stuff. So I see somebody here. Yeah.
And follow up that, a while back, Kristen Gillibrand came out and made a pledge not to take any corporate donations. Would you consider such a pledge?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so I definitely would not take any corporate PAC contributions. Absolutely not. Yeah, and I've also signed the pledge from Climate Hawks, or from the, I think it's Climate Hawks, I don't know, but the No Fossil Fuels pledge, so not to take any money. Really, I think this is true from anyone who's even employed in the fossil fuels industry, or from, obviously, corporate PACs associated with that industry. Similarly for tobacco, I mean, I try to be careful about even where we're taking money from.
Okay, so the next question, looking around the room, this is not me asking the question. This person sees a lot of gray hair. And mine would be right in there. Visit the salon every 3 weeks. What are you doing to reach out to the younger generation? Hire a young campaign manager. She's a millennial, right? Or are you in the generation X? Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Social
Alright.
networking, you're great at it.
All right, well, so we had one comment about social networking and doing things online. I think it's really important to do things in person also. So it was intentional, for example, that we went and put our campaign headquarters across the street from Sierra College. I thought it was really important to be within walking distance and within sight of our biggest community college here in the district. And that's been really productive. So we have an internship program that's up and running that includes both high school students and students from Sierra College. We have some students from right over here from El Dorado Hills who are in it, who are very good about driving all the way to Rockland to come see us. If you know anybody who's interested, we can also arrange for them to help us remotely so they don't have to drive over there quite as much. We had someone from Truckee who was interested just the other day, for example. So I think that, giving people of all different ages a lot of responsibility in the campaign is a great way for them to be involved and take some ownership over it. And frankly, people, whether people are older or younger, I think it's really important that everyone brings their perspective to the campaign, and they bring fresh new ideas, ideas about ways to use social media that wouldn't have occurred to me otherwise. I once did a essentially kind of a Twitter town hall. I didn't know such a thing existed, right? But somebody who's one of the volunteers from the campaign knew about it, connected me, and it was this sort of live 10 questions thing that we did with someone on Twitter who has a lot of followers, and it actually got a lot of traction. I think it was pretty substantive in a way for a lot of people to learn about me through a really unconventional venue. I also try to make a point to go out to high schools and to go out to the colleges. I've been to Columbia College in just outside Sonora in the southern part of our district, and also over to Sierra College multiple times to visit different classes and groups there, and out to some of our high schools as well. So we're doing everything we can, but especially for the upcoming June election, we have to be realistic about the fact that we think that the majority of votes that are cast in June are probably going to be cast by people who are in their 50s and 60s and beyond. And so we do a careful job of outreach. Hi! This is my aunt. I'm going to embarrass her. I told you she lives really close by. I'm glad to stop by. So, we're also trying to do a thorough job of outreach to those communities. And the fact remains that to win in November, there are several groups of people with whom we have to do a really good job. Seniors is one of them. People in the suburbs, so people in sort of the suburban and exurban part of our district. If we can't go win there, we cannot win this district, just because there are so many people there, and those are kind of the most purple parts of the district. Women, are a really important constituency that can bridge some partisan divides for us and help us potentially get enough numbers to win in November. And then, of course, people who are independents and some people who are Republicans, we need to be reaching out to them too. So, young people matter, but seniors actually matter a lot in the math of how we win this district as well.
Okay, next question. The Tea Party and State of Jefferson folks are strong in this district. How would you appeal to them?
All right, so Tom McClintock is a Tea Partier, and I don't think we're going to be winning a lot of Tea Party votes. I just don't think so. That's the bad news. The good news is that we've done some research, we've done some polling. The solid Tom McClintock supporters in our district, people who are just decided that they're going to vote for him, That's about 37% of the district. That's okay. You can work with that. Our approach is actually to let a lot of those folks be. Now, I want to have a conversation with everybody. I think it's really important to respect everybody's views, to try to find, you know, if you disagree about 20 or 30 or even 40% of stuff, there's still a lot you agree on. So I want to be really clear that I want to be engaged with everyone. But in terms of, you know, using our limited time wisely, we have to focus on the votes that we think are going to be the most persuadable to go in November. Now, the state of Jefferson folks are a little bit different, I think. And I mean, I'll tell you that out at the fair in Placerville last summer, I ended up having a conversation with a bunch of the state of Jefferson people. Now, it was really hot. We were in a shady part of the fair. They were in a sunny part of the fair. If I remember correctly, I think we had water, and they didn't. So they ended up coming over and talking to us. My mom was there also. She's a nurse. She's really friendly. She can have a conversation with anybody. So we were just all talking. And I thought it was really interesting to see, first of all, how much we have in common. So, I mean, the folks we were talking to that day really loved the outdoors. They were telling me about how upset they were. They'd gone hiking recently and had come around a corner and just saw a huge stand of dead trees and realized that the forest is dying. I mean, that was very upsetting to them. That is very upsetting to many people who would identify themselves as Democrats also. You know, nobody wants to see our forests dying. Nobody wants to see our great outdoors being destroyed around us. You know, people are also really concerned about their basic economic well-being. How are we going to create good-paying jobs in their communities? You know, what are we doing to support rural public schools? If people want to start businesses, can they even do that? If they want to do some online education? I mean, all these practical things I'm talking about, I think, are actually the priorities that a lot of the state of Jefferson folks feel are not being heard in the state of California at the state level. And I think they have a point. I mean, when we're talking about their frustrations with state politics in California, I want to be clear, I don't support the project of secession, but when you look at the issues and the fact that they feel dominated by LA and San Francisco and like rural California and the more mountainous parts of California don't get heard, I think fair enough. I think that's actually true, and I think that's something that is starting to be corrected a little bit at the state level. Like you saw Jerry Brown just recently actually come out with a bunch more funding for fire prevention. You know, but I think they have a valid point. One thing they don't like is the fact that Tom McClintock is from Southern California. I mean, if you go and talk to them and say, do you want to be represented by someone from LA in Congress, they're not going to be real happy with that. So I think that talking about, again, like practical economic well-being and the idea that they deserve a fair level playing field and they're not getting that right now. You know, if they feel like the cards are stacked against them and they have all these extra hurdles to overcome to become successful, that's actually basically true right now. And we do need to do more to address the needs of the more rural communities here in our area.
Okay, next question. Speaker Ryan pushed a proposal to cut retirement benefits, and there are discussions to freeze the pay of federal workers' COLAs. What is your position on these? How will you protect our public servants?
Yeah, so my position again would be no and no. I think it's really important to be paying our public servants fairly, you know, not to be cutting their benefits or eliminating COLAs for their jobs. I'm also really opposed to the federal hiring freezes that are kind of in vogue sometimes. And people think, oh, you know, if you're frustrated with the size of government, just slapping on a hiring freeze is the way to address that. I think that's not the right approach at all. Because first of all, or a good percentage of the people who get hired as new federal employees every year are veterans. So when you go freeze federal hiring, you're actually cutting off a huge avenue for our veterans to go get jobs, which doesn't make much sense. You're also painting with a really broad brush across all our agencies. And, you know, when you have an agency like the Forest Service that's really struggling to keep up with the workload being foisted on them, and then they don't have the personnel they need, they're not allowed to hire more personnel, you're just setting them up for failure and disaster. So I think the smart thing to do, and in some cases this can increase efficiency, we can make better investments and do projects that save us money in the long run. The smart thing to do is actually fund our agencies appropriately, make sure they can hire the staff that they need, they can retain the skilled staff who have, you know, the years of experience, and we absolutely need to be paying these people fairly and honoring our promises to them.
Okay. This comes from Diane in Cameron Park. Previously, I'm gonna summarize this. You know, you said that you would go with the Democratic committee candidate. You have continued in the race. This surprised, Diane, this was your question. Surprised and concerned that you changed your statement. And she has a lot of Democratic friends who have supported you all along, but she's had a hard time, if I can paraphrase, explain to them why you're staying in the race.
Sure, do you want to add to your question at
I
all?
think that's just the biggest question we all had. We were surprised after, they announced support for the other candidate. We're all very concerned about splitting votes, about what's going to happen in June, and who's going to end up the top two. We absolutely positively do not want the Clinton back in office. And so we were all very impressed with you. So what I need to hear is the difference between what you had told me when we met at Denny's and afterwards, and why your choice and why you continue.
Great, and can I ask you one question just to make sure I understand? So when you say you're concerned about splitting votes, what is your concern exactly? What is the worry that might happen?
That maybe McClintock would end up back on the ballot, and at that point, I don't know, just splitting too many Democratic votes between you, maybe Morse, and just not ending up with a good ballot. I mean, we really want to make sure that we would have loved to have you had the support of the Democratic committee. It didn't happen, and we're concerned that too much money is getting split. Too many people are confused. They don't know the difference between you and the other candidate. And that what's going to happen in June, because we absolutely don't want McClintock. So, and I've supported you, I've donated, and I need to go back to my friends, and all of us are concerned about that, so.
Okay, so this is super helpful. So you've listed off a whole bunch of things. Maybe Stephanie, can you help me remember them all? Because there were a lot of different ones. No, it's okay, so I don't really think
I guess your concern is that McClintock is going to be on the ballot in November.
So I want to move through this in order. So there's several things. So I think first we should talk about how the voting works. And then I'm totally happy to talk about the choice that I made and what ended up happening with the Democratic Party.
That would be the thing.
Yeah, so we're going to do both of those two things. And then the third thing seems to be what are the differences between me and Jessica Morse? That seems to be a third category.
I think that's a good summary.
Okay, all right, so I just wanted to organize this a little bit.
We're
Yeah, maybe
taking
there's
one
a fourth-
question and turning it
Can we
into.
just
Okay,
throw in on this concern here?
Yeah.
What seems to be going around is many people are concerned that the votes are going to get split by the Democrats, and there will be no Democrats on the ballot. is
so there
what
are
I keep
multiple
hearing.
different concerns. So that's why we're going to start by talking about the voting. Then we're going to talk about the Democratic Party. Then we're going to talk about the candidates that are running. All right, just got to organize this to make sure we get to it all. All right, so how do elections work in California? There's an election in June. It's a primary. It's totally normal to have multiple candidates running from each party. That's the case in almost all districts in almost all years. Our district is unusual in that we've had a real dearth of candidates in the past before. So that's why people kind of aren't accustomed to what a primary looks like. But the way this works, okay, important thing number one, Tom McClintock cannot win in June. So some people have the impression that if Tom McClintock gets 50% of the vote in June or more, that he wins outright or something. No. Okay, so I just want to be real clear about that. Now here's what actually happens. The top two vote getters from June go on to the ballot in November. Now this actually really helps us prevent splitting the vote in the end, because in November we're guaranteed that there is no Green Party candidate on the ballot, unless some Green Party candidate somehow ran a write-in campaign and got enough votes in June. We're guaranteed there's no Libertarian candidate who's going to go on the ballot in November. So the ballot in November is only two people, and it is going to be Tom McClintock and a Democrat. The question is just which Democrat. Okay, you're shaking your head.
Right, because there, as you know, there are two Republicans on the ballot and there are four Democrats.
That's
Well,
right.
if we take the Democrat inclined vote and we smear that over four different possibilities, it could easily be that each one of you would have fewer votes than that rogue Republican that runs simultaneous with McClintock. So we're seeing that it's a strong possibility, because there's so many Democrats, on the list, that we can wind up with Mitchell White, who advertises himself as somewhat to the, or greatly to the right of Tom McClintock, and Tom McClintock. Those will be our two choices. So that
Okay,
is
so how many of you ever heard of Mitchell White? Okay, so some of you have. Now, here are some facts about what you're saying, right? So I've looked at this very carefully, and in making the decision to stay in the race, I actually went and looked at every congressional primary that has happened under the top two system in every district in the state of California, under that system. It ends up being something like 150 different races. It's very common that people like Mitchell White run against an incumbent of their own party. And when I say people like Mitchell White, I mean people with no political experience, with no real endorsements, with no serious source of funding. Mitchell White has raised less than $10,000 for his campaign, for example, with no campaign staff, minimal publicity, and no real structure to their campaign. I mean, Mitchell White didn't even pay to put a statement in the voter guide in all the counties of the district, for example. People like that run all the time and usually get around 5, at most 10% of the vote. We know from polling that we did, that number I was telling you about, the 37% of people who are McClintock supporters, they are strong McClintock supporters. They are not going to get randomly split in half to go vote for Mitchell White. There is only one time in California, out of all those races I was just describing, where you actually saw this kind of nightmare scenario you're talking about happen, which was actually a race with 2 Republicans and 4 Democrats. Okay, so sounds familiar, right? Here's what's fundamentally different about that race. That was a district in Southern California. I believe this was 2012. I would have to go check the year. And the 2 Republicans running were the incumbent, but it was a year that the new districts were deployed, right? So it was after the census. So this was an incumbent who had been partially kind of redistricted out of his district, or if that makes sense, that he was still in the same district, but a lot of new territory was added. So he didn't have all the advantages of being an incumbent, because a lot of the voters were new to him. The person who came and ran against him as another Republican from his own party was a state senator. He had been a member of the assembly for the area before. He raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think he may have been his party's leader in the state senate at the time. I mean, this was someone who was a serious force. And they did, so those 2 Republicans split the vote about in half, right? They each got maybe around 27% of the vote or so. And so they did have 2 Republicans advance on to the November election. But you need to ask yourself this. Is Mitchell White someone of the same capacity and the same power in this situation as someone who's a state senator and an assembly member and has hundreds of thousands of dollars at their disposal in a professional campaign?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm concerned about that is I know that there's so many Republicans in the district that really don't like McClintock either.
No, so I'm going to tell you based on data. So we did polling about this, and I mean, it's interesting and unusual to find a Republican who doesn't like McClintock and doesn't prefer a Democrat in this situation. But I'm telling you that when we did polling on this, there were actually very few Republicans who were pretty dissatisfied with McClintock. So, I don't see any fact-based argument with any real evidence behind it to suggest that Mitchell White is capable of getting more than 5 to 10% of the vote here. There is just never an example of someone in California who has pulled that off. And so I think that there is, strange things happen. Volcanoes gobble up neighborhoods in Hawaii, out of the blue. That's actually a neighborhood my parents almost used to live in when I was born in Hawaii and we lived there. But, strange things happen in the world. But I would put that at under 1%. I mean, I think it's a very, very low probability event. The only thing you have to believe is that either I or Jessica Morse are going to get more votes than Mitchell White, right? And I think that's pretty easy to believe. I actually think we will both get more votes than Mitchell White. And because the other thing that's a little off about what you just said is assuming that the 4 Democrats running would get equal numbers of the votes. So again, we have someone running, Robert Lawton, who's this guy from the southern part of the district. Has anyone ever heard of Robert Lawton?
He's not going to get any votes.
Thank you.
I've seen him talk.
All right,
No
so we're
votes.
already down to only 3 Democrats then functionally. And I mean, to give you an idea of this Mitchell White thing though, to go back for a second, I mean, when the Sacramento Bee did their endorsement process, They did not even interview Mitchell White or Robert Lawton because they considered them not viable candidates. And those are folks just looking at the race objectively here. All right, so Robert Lawton, not going to get votes, did not even put out a statement in the voter guides, and is not running a campaign. Rosa Calderon, we'll see how she does. I actually think that a lot of people respond really positively to her ballot designation of being a geoscientist. I wouldn't be surprised if she gets some percentage of the votes. But I'm quite confident that probably both Jessica Morse and I will get more votes than Mitchell White. Certainly one of us will. And the question is just which Democrat goes along to the November election with Tom McClintock. That's really the question being decided here. And if someone tries to tell you that you should be voting out of fear and there's somehow going to be 2 Republicans on the ballot, that is fear-mongering. That is not a fact-based argument. I mean, I just can't see a way that that happens. All right, so that's how the voting works.
Yeah, so I was going to say, if you can get to her question on why you changed your
Yeah.
position, I think that would be.
I think that answers it.
Because I've got about,
The research and
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to hear.
Well, there's more.
Looked at it more.
So there's more. So I mean, I've looked at this very carefully. And so I would say that, when asked before, did I plan to support the endorsed candidate of the Democratic Party? My honest, true answer was yes. That was my plan. And that was what I planned to do. The issue is that the process worked out really differently than I ever expected, and really differently than it ever has in other districts in our state. The 2 main things that were different were that our local party did not do a vetting process, so they did not look carefully at candidates and their backgrounds to see if they would be able to be successful in a general election, where we're all going to be torn apart by Koch brothers opposition research. And I mean, the goal here is winning. The goal here is to run a strong enough candidate to really beat Tom McClintock in November. That was my first concern. My second concern was that at the local grassroots level, when our clubs voted and when people voted after these different foreign debates that were held in our district, I actually consistently had the most support. Our delegates then went to the state party convention and voted the opposite way. Now, they're allowed to do that, but that is not normal. That is not what usually happens. You can ask them why they made that choice. It's a little inexplicable to me. And so after the convention, I was left with 2 choices, neither of which were perfect. And I fully acknowledge that neither of them were perfect. One would have been to get out of the race and to say to everybody else, I hope your chosen candidate does well in November. I'm not totally convinced that that's possible, but I hope so. And also to say to all the grassroots supporters that we had, you came out, you participated in politics for a lot of people for the first time ever. You really tried to make your voice heard and tried to make a difference. And the party machinery crushed you. The party just made a choice from on high. We just have to accept it, and tough luck. And I think that would have been really damaging to the broader goal of grassroots organizing here in our district. I think that part of the way you beat Tom McClintock in November is by having a big grassroots movement where you have people feeling empowered and engaged, and people feel much better about an election. Frankly, I've volunteered for a lot of candidates who've lost elections, and, people understand how elections work. I mean, the voters have their say. And my experience has been that it's much easier for people to move on and come together after an election that's clear, fair, transparent, it's actually the views of people in the district, rather than telling them that they need to completely hew to what 67 people decided in a room in San Diego, with no particular written justification or logic necessarily. So that was why I made the decision that I did. I fully acknowledge that this is something where I changed my mind, and I think that it is absolutely right that if you're running for office and you change your mind about something, people should ask you these questions, people should hold you accountable. I'm very clear and straightforward about my own background, qualifications, policy positions. I've had people say, oh, doesn't this just mean you'll change your mind about anything, you're just lying to us all the time? No. It is true, though, that in the future, if you make some sort of commitment about a political strategy and circumstances really change in a way you didn't expect, I might change my mind again. So like I've pledged to join the Climate Solutions Caucus, for example. I think it's a good idea. I think our district needs a seat at the table where we're talking about solutions to climate change at the federal level. But if another group came along that was more effective, or if I saw there was some real problem, you know, with the functioning of that group, who knows? Maybe it's bought by industry and I just don't know that as an outsider. I mean, I might change my mind and take that new information into account and not be part of the group. Okay, yeah.
That answers my question, because I have no problem with changing your mind. What I needed to hear was that you did the research and that you have support and you believe in what you've done, and that's what I need to hear, because I don't want somebody in office that when they're presented with other facts, don't change their mind.
Right.
Because they're so wedded to the answer that it's always no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've
That's
actually, at this point now, a lot of things have happened in the race. I mean, at this point now, I've been endorsed by the Sacramento Bee and the Modesto Bee, both of whom actually agree that I would be the strongest candidate to go up against McClintock in the fall and would give him the toughest battle. So we do have a situation where there are a lot of different judgments, you know, that different organizations have made, and I think every voter should just make their own choice and evaluate the candidates and choose who they'd most like to represent them. Okay.
Rich, do you want to add anything as a former chair of the Democratic Central Committee here?
I'm Rich Maher. I'm the former chair of the El Dorado County Democratic Central Committee. I got involved in my first congressional campaign 56 years ago, and have run a bunch of campaigns and worked on a lot of them since. Been a national delegate, etc. I first met Regina many months ago, and have been supportive of her changing her mind, so to speak. Part of the process of making endorsements means that people have to, as she says, vet the candidates. Now, along with your dad and former Congressman Waldy, the late Congressman Waldy, and a bunch of other folks, we've had a group that I call the Old Farts Caucus, or our Friday group. You know, people with too much experience to be relevant. And one of them we met with her early. One of them is a long-term Foreign Service officer and who took a good look at the candidates and you and Jessica and said, hey, something doesn't add up there. And John Garone, whose letters to the editor you've read many times and so forth, said he bought your stuff and not hers, I guess. And then what happened in San Diego is a bunch of decisions around the endorsement got made from people not here in the district and not aware of the nature of the district. I ran Charlie Brown's campaign when it got started many years ago, and he's the closest to getting us the Democrat in the seat since. I'm very active in the community and veteran stuff and many other things, and I didn't come here with an open mind. I came here because I'm supportive of you, and one of the things I'm clear on is that you're doing a fabulous job with Twitter and Facebook and all of the social media. It's real important. And your campaign is doing a great job on a daily basis, and that's why I'm here tonight. So I urge you all to vote for her, and if you have any questions for me, I'll take them afterwards.
Rich, thank you.
Thank you. And I did want to clarify that the delegates who went to the convention in San Diego are actually from the district here. They might not be in close communication with all the groups in the district necessarily, but they, you know, were individuals that are from our district here.
But they weren't the only ones voting.
Well, we can talk about this afterward, but, you know, I just want to be accurate with you guys.
So this is not the bookend to the conversation. We need to talk a little further because I have 3 questions along these lines.
All right.
2 are questions. 1, I don't see the question. It's more of a comment.
Oh, you should read it.
Should I? Okay.
We take all questions,
Yeah,
even if they're rude, even if they're impolite, we're going to take them all.
And I was a tough journalist, man. I asked tough questions. This one doesn't feel like a question, so whoever asked it on dirty politics, lying, all this stuff, do you want to stand up and...
Well, this might be from the internet.
It's from the internet.
Oh, it's from the internet. All right, so we take internet questions.
This
All right,
is
should I
so
start with
Regina.
this
This is so Regina to read the
I need to just do it all. Okay, so should we start with the real questions and do this one at the end? Maybe?
Yeah, that's what
All
I was
right.
going to do, yeah.
All right, so
Although
let's
I
do the
could
more legitimate questions. and then we'll
Okay,
get to
so the
discussion.
other one was what happened in San Diego. I think we just covered this. Do you think Jessica connected better to the Dems? I think it was just about money. Wasn't it just about money?
So the question is, what happened in San Diego? Did Jessica connect better to Democrats? I think that you should ask the delegates from our district. It's a little, I mean, I said to them at the time, I said, people are going to come to you and they're going to ask you to justify your choice. What are you going to tell them? And most of them could not give me an answer. I got answers like, I think Jessica has more energy. I just feel like voting that way. I mean, you know, I don't know. So I actually can't really explain that to you.
I explain it to people as, Regina's a little wonky. I want a really wonky person back in DC. I spent time on the Hill. I don't want someone who's superficial. I want someone who can roll up their sleeves, analyze an issue, and understand it, and represent their constituents. So, you know.
Okay, all right, next question.
Sorry, the question got me a little
All right,
wrong up.
we'll keep you calm. It's
The
okay.
next one.
All right, let's make sure we go through these all. So there was another one on the same theme, kind of, right?
There seems to be increasing negativity going on as the election approaches. That's a fair question. Comments on that?
Yeah, so I don't think I would phrase it as increasing negativity. I would phrase it as increasing scrutiny. I think that there have been a lot of things that have been unusual about this race up until now. One of those things has been the total lack of media attention on the race and the total lack of sort of actually hard questions. So I think that we should expect to see that all increase over time. And this applies to everyone. I mean, you know, the last 5 or 6 days have been the only days of my experience as a candidate where we've gotten multiple calls from journalists. You know, the Sacramento Bee's written critical articles about me as well, and I think fair enough. I think that's what they should do. I mean, that's their job in this situation. It's also the job of candidates to ask hard questions of each other. And unfortunately, we're in a race right now where there was a debate that was supposed to happen on April 29th that had to be canceled due to another candidate's desire not to participate. So we do not have an opportunity for you to actually see candidates ask each other questions or really discuss the issues directly with each other, and that's very unfortunate, I think. You know, we had some really good forums in the district last year, but I will tell you that that was basically all of us standing on stages and just answering questions in a row. I have never had an opportunity as a candidate to ask a single question of another candidate in a public forum, ever. And so I think that you should expect to see some of those questions being asked instead in writing and, you know, in communications around the election. You know, I would much prefer to have a debate. If any of you want to set it up and know a good moderator and have some inducement to get other candidates to come, great, let's make it happen. But, you know, in addition to that, or perhaps instead of that, I think you should expect to see more critical looks at all the candidates. And I don't mean critical in a negative way, but I mean critical in a fact-based way, because you should be subjected to some serious scrutiny if you're proposing to go to Congress and actually represent us there.
Okay, here's an F.
All right. Question. Why are you lying and playing such dirty politics? You were not endorsed by the Democrats, and yet you continue to lie and run a very negative campaign. Are you a McClintock bot? We will start with the last one. All right, well, the internet asked it, so maybe
I'm
Bob
right
asked
from the
it.
Morris campaign.
I know.
So here we go. All right, am I a McClintock bot? No. And I would love to take this opportunity to clarify some of the stranger rumors I have heard about myself. So there is a rumor that I've seen typed in social media that I'm a Republican. That's not true. So I originally registered declined to state when I first was voting in Placer County here, then became a registered Democrat around 2006-ish and have been since. I volunteered for Democratic campaigns going back to Gore Lieberman in the year 2000 when I went out and did voter registration in Spanish, and a variety of other candidates since then. I was an intern for Barbara Boxer back in 2001 in her Sacramento office, so I'm not a Republican. I've actually seen in writing that I worked for a Republican in Congress after college. That's not true. So after college, I worked on a human rights trial for 3 months and then joined the Foreign Service straight away in September 2004. So I was not working for a Republican in Congress. So I am most definitely not a Republican plant. And again, if we believe the judgment of major papers in our region, I'm actually the person who should make McClintock the most concerned if I go advance to the general election, because there's good reason to think I have the best chance of actually beating him in November. We addressed why I was still running as a candidate, even though not being endorsed by the Democratic Party. And it's also important to note that there are split loyalties among Democrats in our region and even among the Democratic Party. So nationally, the Democratic Party is neutral in our race. It is the California Democratic Party that has endorsed Morse for now, but the way you become your party's nominee is by winning the election in June. So even if you're not the endorsed candidate at the California state level of your party, if you are the top Democratic vote getter in June, you become your party's nominee. So it's not as though sort of all ties are severed with the Democratic Party or anything like that, far from it. And I really welcome the opportunity to work with them after June and to repair those relationships. Let's see here, lying. I'm just gonna say I'm not lying to you. Running a very negative campaign. No, actually I think I spend a lot of time trying to be really positively engaged with the voters in our community. And then first question is also about lying and playing such dirty politics. Not sure what that refers to.
It's always taken the upper right.
All right.
Okay, so I think this came from the internet. I served as a county supervisor and McClintock refused to help when we needed federal grants. Would you work for us?
Yes. Again, I think this is really important, and I have had meetings with folks who are not Democrats, who are local elected officials here, and some of them even recognize they've got somebody in office right now who might agree with them ideologically, but who is doing nothing for the region and won't help, won't go out and fight, won't connect our local governments with federal grants. And I think that that's wrong. And it was interesting to me, the Bee even came to the judgment that even local conservatives might be better served by replacing McClintock. Because a representative can really have a lot of impact on some of our local needs here, and your voice is a little bit more diluted on the big national policy stuff. So I really welcome the opportunity to work with all our local elected officials, whether they're Democrats or Republicans.
What is your plan to create affordable housing in this district?
Oh, affordable housing. So this is one of the top issues in our district. I mean, I'll tell you that in talking with a fire chief up in the Tahoe area, and actually I went and visited Aero Metals up here in El Dorado Hills, and I've talked to a number of other business owners. The top issue that they usually mention is affordable housing. That if you can't have a place for your employees to live that's relatively near where your business is, people can't show up on time, it really hurts their morale. This is a major issue in our community here. Unfortunately, there's no one single solution, especially at the federal level, but there are several things that we could do better and differently. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we are putting in place the strongest possible incentives for the construction of affordable housing. And the tax bill that McClintock voted for that was passed back in December actually reduces the value of the incentives for developers to build affordable housing. So the estimate is that that tax bill is going to result in about 200,000 fewer units of affordable housing over the next several years. And something else I read estimated that 20,000 of those lost units would be in California alone. So again, right now we're taking a system that is not even keeping pace with the demand for affordable housing, and our Congress has just gone and attacked it. And so I think that we need to restore the value of those incentives to make sure that we get those units back that would have otherwise been constructed. I think it's really important for a representative to work closely with local governments on this issue and to make sure that we're connecting them with every possible resource. Even the farm bill that's being negotiated right now can have some resources in it for our smaller towns and our more rural areas to deal with affordable housing. And we need to make sure that, it pains me actually to see that these negotiations are going on around the farm bill right now, and to know that it is something that is so important to our district, and it's a multi-year bill that we won't necessarily get to touch again and fix again in the short-term future. And McClintock is the person out there representing us in those discussions. And I can guarantee you that he is not pushing hard for as much support as possible for our communities. I think that we need to be looking at all of those programs. But we also, I think as a representative, you need to think hard about what you can do outside your official capacity to try to push forward on this issue in our district. Because, I mean, a fair amount of this is going to lie with local governments and is more controlled at the state and local level. But as a representative, you know, you still have power. You have power to set an agenda. You have power to try to get people to come out to meetings and to try to push things forward. So I would definitely work really actively with groups like, for example, the Mountain Housing Council that's been created in the Truckee area. I think is really a model of a way to bring together local governments, businesses, nonprofits. And I think that we need a representative who's going to want to go to those kinds of meetings also and be part of that discussion and really be working collaboratively with them and giving the issue the importance that it deserves because it's a complex issue, but it's very important for our local economy and for families in our district.
How will you protect seniors and the disabled against cuts?
Oh, yeah, so this is also really upsetting to me right now that there's such an active discussion going on, straight from McClintock's mouth actually, about spending reform in Washington, because after passing a tax bill that just exploded our deficit, all of a sudden he's incredibly concerned about the deficit and is primarily interested in reducing it through cuts to really critical programs. So, you know, I'm completely opposed to that approach. I do think that we need reform to fix some of the damage that's been wrought by the tax bill. I support getting the very wealthy and large corporations paying their fair share and making sure that we can continue to invest in the programs that are really important for our seniors and for folks who are disabled, because a lot is on the chopping block right now. Programs for veterans are actually on the chopping block as well, and I think that's wrong. You know, when it comes to Social Security specifically, I support eliminating the cap on the payroll tax. Right now we have a system where people pay payroll tax on their first $127,000 of income every year, and then they just stop paying. And this is one of the only regressive taxes in our system. So it means that back when I was at Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream and I'm scooping away, you know, I'm making my small paycheck every week, I would be paying payroll tax on every single dollar that I was earning. But somebody who's earning $1 million a year only pays that tax on the first portion and then stops paying it. And there's really no rational reason or no explanation I've ever seen. It's a good explanation for why it's structured that way. And if we just eliminated that cap, that would fix about 90% of the shortfall that's projected in funding for Social Security. So I think it's the one thing to do that is fair, but that also would do a lot to shore up Social Security.
ADA law, has it been replaced? I don't think so. And if so, what actions would you take in Congress maybe to defend it against any changes? Americans?
Yeah. No, so I believe that the Americans, and I can do some research on this afterward to confirm this, but I believe the Americans with Disabilities Act is intact and has not been particularly repealed or eviscerated by Congress. But that said, well, yeah, right? So that said, I think it is important to have people in Congress who understand the importance of that law. And I mean, you know, I'll tell you that I've mentioned this to some groups before, but that I actually have a genetic bone disease. And, you know, I've thought about this even in relation to my own kids, because we don't know if they have the same disease or not. And so especially if we were planning for them to be able to go to preschool and things like that. I mean, I remembered when I was a kid, and there was no Americans with Disabilities Act, at one point having a broken leg. And granted, my memory's a little fuzzy on this because I was pretty little, but I remember basically not being able to go to preschool for quite a while. And my impression, at least myself as a little kid, was that they didn't really want to deal with the difficulty of having a kid in a cast, kind of, you know, messing up their routine and things like that. And certainly, you know, I've had the experience of trying to maneuver around and realizing how many buildings are not accessible and how much your mobility can really be limited. You know, if you're kind of scooting around crutches or in a wheelchair for a period of time.
Or have a big, you know,
well,
break on your knee.
So, thank you for coming in the condition, Stephanie. I'm glad you got your chair. You know, but I take this really seriously, and, you know, kind of going back to my own kids, I mean, it was a concern that I had when we were trying to plan how can they even go to daycare, and I actually didn't realize until I started looking into it that now, because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, even if you have a child who's in a daycare center, and even if one of them did accidentally break a leg or something, they actually have to try to make reasonable accommodations to let your kid keep going. And that's really important, because otherwise, you know, it's really detrimental to families and to kids who get excluded and things like that. So this is something that's personally important to me.
So you would definitely fight to protect
Yes,
it.
absolutely.
Okay, there's going to be an initiative likely on the November ballot calling for increased privacy regulation of tech companies like Google and Facebook. What is your stance on privacy issues?
Yes, I think I would want to see the exact sort of text of that initiative. But I think there absolutely needs to be much stronger consumer protections put in place. I'm personally really horrified by a lot of things that have happened around the theft of individuals' data through social media. I think we also need to have a lot more transparency when it comes to political advertising on social media. You know, companies like Facebook, I mean, they're trying to catch up, but they're really far behind. And I'll tell you that for a long time I've been shocked as a candidate that if we go and do any kind of advertising, you know, a printed handout, there has to be a disclaimer on there saying who paid for it. You don't have to put disclaimers currently on online advertising as a candidate. So I support legislation at the federal level to move those same requirements for printed materials over to digital advertising as well. You know, I think we need to be much more transparent with people. If something's being advertised to you and being paid when it's being advertised to you, you should be able to see that clearly when you're reading through things in social media. You know, but I also think we've seen that, you know, technology companies and social media companies have had years. I mean, they've had years to regulate themselves and to prove that they can be good stewards of your personal information and your data, and they've completely failed. I mean, I think it's an outrageous failure when you have the data of millions and millions of people being siphoned off and used in ways that they never envisioned. So I absolutely think that you know, our regulations and our protections for consumers need to catch up with the reality of where we are in terms of technology.
Okay, got two more questions here. What is your response, you may have covered this a little bit, to allegations by the SAC-B article, I think, that ran this week, that you are misleading voters with your direct mail?
Okay, so the Sacramento Bee decided to write an article fact-checking our mailer. Now, did any of you get this mailer? Okay, does anyone have it? Maybe you can share it with people. Okay, let's see here.
Is that it?
That's actually not the one they're fact-checking.
Okay.
So they're fact-checking one that's, there are really two that have very similar text. They seem to have picked one of those two. But it basically goes through and says something to the effect of, I worked abroad to keep us safe, you know, I'm going to go fight Donald Trump in Congress and stand up to him, and then says, you know, very similar actually to the text that's on our handouts and on our little door knocking piece, you know, refers to my ballot designation, which is military security analyst, and then says that I worked abroad. The part that they had an issue with primarily was working abroad to keep us safe from terrorism. Well, actually, they had an issue with three things. So first, they wanted to look into my ballot designation of military security analyst. I actually think if you read the article, I was pretty happy with their research into it. So they go through and summarize my recent research. So the logic here, and I should say I was very straightforward with the Secretary of State when I filled out this form to go on the ballot this way. You know, yes, I am a professor, but a research professor. So that means that about 80% of my professional time in recent years has been spent doing research rather than teaching, because if you're at a large research university, that's primarily what you do and how you're evaluated. So my PhD is from Yale. It's in political science. It's from the Program on Order, Conflict, and Violence. So my specialty has been violence and civil wars, and I actually won a national award for my dissertation on local security after civil wars. I give lectures internationally on this topic. I mean, I've talked on, you know, I've been invited to speak in Sweden, at Sciences Po in Paris, at Cambridge in the UK, throughout Latin America, at most of the top universities in the US, I mean, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Brown, Berkeley, the list kind of goes on and on. So that's the field that I've worked in terms of my academic research. And then most recently, in the last year and a half to 2 years, I was working on a project that got published in September 2017 that's looking at how militaries train and socialize and use civilians and militia members during civil wars. So that's the substance of my research that I was presenting on at conferences, giving talks about, and then got published in actually the #3 journal in our field in September of this past year. So in the article, they actually go through and refer to my article And then they went and found one of my advisors from Yale, who had supervised my dissertation there, and interviewed her. And she essentially says in the SACB article, yeah, Regina's trained in military security issues and military strategy, and this is what she's worked on. So the SACB actually seemed pretty satisfied with that part of it. The part where I disagree with their dissection of the mailer is, their sort of criticism or disagreement about the nature of my work in the Foreign Service. So before I was in academia doing this other research, I was a Foreign Service officer. So it's important to note I was not a contractor, I was not some sort of temporary intern or something. I was actually a Foreign Service officer. It's very difficult to become a Foreign Service officer. And the application process, which I started shortly after 9/11, or as soon as I could after 9/11, took years. To get your security clearances and things. When you become a Foreign Service officer, you're worldwide available and you're a generalist. So the training that people get is actually quite similar no matter where in the world you're going to be sent. And in my case, wanting to build bridges, ratchet down tensions, and work to ensure our security after 9/11 was the core motivation for why I went and joined the Foreign Service. I mean, I actually went and took a year of Arabic in that intervening time after 9/11 before I started in the Foreign Service. Took a bunch of Middle Eastern history classes, thought about being a minor in that area. Really wanted to be working directly on these issues. And then when I joined the Foreign Service, I got the same general training in Washington that everyone does. And then did consular training because they wanted me to do consular work. And the way the B characterized consular work is basically running background checks, issuing visas, but they didn't really seem to buy the fact that preventing terrorists from entering the United States is an integral part of consular work. And especially in the years shortly after 9/11, I mean, the State Department did a ton to beef up the training for all consular officers around the world. I really disagreed with the B's characterization that there are places where terrorism is an issue and where terrorist travel is of concern to the State Department, and then there are places where that's not a concern, because that actually totally misunderstands the entire strategy around border security after 9/11. The entire point was actually that you need to have strong defenses and people who are well-trained and very attentive to any possibility of terrorists trying to get visas at every single post abroad. And when the Bee was preparing their article, I actually sent them congressional testimony by Maura Hardy, who was the Assistant Secretary in charge of Consular Affairs at the time, saying exactly this, that preventing terrorism was a top priority for people at every single one of the 211 posts of the State Department, especially in the time period in question. And they just chose not to interview anyone from the State Department for their article. They did not interview any of my coworkers, and I really disagreed with that. In fact, within hours, actually within 1 hour of their article going live online, we were getting emails from Foreign Service officers saying they're really mischaracterizing the nature of Foreign Service work. And we have letters from 2 ambassadors going back to the Bee right now, which we hope they will publish, who specifically supervised me in Guatemala, saying that working to prevent terrorists from traveling to the United States was actually the top priority for us and a core part of our work there. So I wish that they had come to me and just said, hey, can we interview people who actually worked with you there? And then we would have given them their information, and they could have written a slightly different article.
Yeah. Regina, did I tell you she's smart? Wonky and smart, same thing.
Okay, can we go fast?
We're going to have one last question.
Okay.
And you're the most forthright person I know. Do you have someone that you would like to see run for president in 2020?
I have lots of people I would like to see run for president in 2020. And, again, talking about Democratic primaries, I hope that there is a robust primary in the presidential race in 2020. I think it's very healthy and good for us to have multiple strong qualified candidates in any race and for people to have a range of choices. I personally... What is the qualities that you would like to see? Oh, okay.
That's the follow-up question.
So, I think that I hope and expect to see multiple women running. I think that should become more normal at every level of politics in our country, and we do have several strong candidates. I frankly hope that both Elizabeth Warren and Kirsten Gillibrand run, and potentially there are other women I can think of too who would be great candidates. candidates. I would love to see multiple women in that race, but I think the most critical thing for any candidate in the 2020 election, and frankly for the Democrats as a party in the 2018 elections, is to have a really strong economic message. I think that, you know, nationally, some of the messaging that I see from the Democratic Party is, it's just, to me, not concrete enough, it's not strong enough. I was personally really disappointed by this Better Deal platform that was put out last summer. I heard a lot of buzz kind of behind the scenes about it. I was really curious what it was going to be. I thought it was going to be this amazing thing coming out swinging. And I thought it was just a very diluted jumble of a whole bunch of different disconnected policies. And I think it's really important for Democrats to be able to stand up. You know, you need to have a short answer for what do you stand for. You know, and I'm really in favor of continuing to define ourselves as the party that wants to stand up for working families and, you know, wants to stand up for people's economic well-being and their ability to work hard and get ahead. And, you know, I want to see people being leaders in the party who have that kind of tangible, practical orientation. So on the House side, for example, 3 people I really like, and who I really would, you know, want to work closely with, are Tim Ryan, Seth Moulton, and Sherry Bustos from Illinois. I think that they're all Democrats who are very practical and tangible and results-oriented and very hands-on with the communities that they represent. And I think that's, you know, that's the kind of work that we need to be doing as Democrats. I think we need to be showing that, you know, it's not about partisan games, it's about rolling your sleeves up and actually getting things done and helping, you know, to build more opportunity in our communities.
I think that's a great way.
There was one question that was part of that three-part question that didn't get answered.
Okay.
The difference between yourself and Jessica.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So there are several differences. You know, healthcare and climate change are the 2 main areas where we have policy differences with each other. You know, I take care to be consistent in the policy statements that I'm making. And so I've consistently said exactly what I said to you guys here tonight about healthcare: stabilize the individual market, bring down prescription drug prices, expand coverage. You know, again, I wish we were having a debate. I mean, I actually tried to ask this question in one of these non-debate debates that we had before and didn't get an answer. But from my take on it, you know, Jessica Morse was a strong supporter of federal single payer for months. In fact, in that forum in Cameron Park, I think that was her position at the time. That is not currently her position at all. And you know, her website doesn't mention that anymore. She's thrown out all different ideas, from universal primary care, I don't know what that means, and have never seen a serious proposal around it, to price transparency, to just the whole, you know, kind of a whole menu of things. So it depends what her policy is on any given day, if we agree or disagree, but I think that the main difference is having a consistent policy or not. And also, frankly, we know that Tom McClintock's approach in November toward any Democrat running here is going to be yelling and screaming about socialism. You know, socialism, 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 just trying to scare people in our district. And I think having a lot of video of your candidate talking about federal single payer in very aggressive ways is something that will get roped into this whole packaging of, you know, you got a socialist running here. And so I try to be really clear that I'm about hard work and, you know, I'm about building on improving our existing system, but not about anything that could be portrayed as a radical government takeover of health insurance. On climate change, you know, I'm really proud to be the person in the race with the strongest positions on climate change. I think that, you know, it's not enough just to say we need to be restoring our forests or investing in green energy jobs. If you're running for a federal office, you should actually be committed to taking action at the federal level to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we've been asked this in forums over and over and over again in this race, you know, among the Democratic candidates. No one else has ever been willing to commit to something like a carbon fee and dividend, for example. I support a carbon fee and dividend at the federal level. You know, I think that we need to take action to actually deal with climate change. And the longer we put it off, the worse it's going to be for our local economy, the more money it's going to cost the government to deal with it down the road. And I think it's not enough to just replace Tom McClintock. You know, we need to replace him with someone who's going to be a leader on climate issues. And that's also why I would join the Climate Solutions Caucus. We can clarify, that's my current plan. If they turn out not to be a great group, I wouldn't. But my current plan is to join the Climate Solutions Caucus because I think that we need to have a seat at the table and be part of that discussion. I mean, we have Tahoe and Yosemite in our district, and there are no other Democrats or anyone else in the race who is interested in joining the Climate Solutions Caucus. So those are a couple differences.
All right. I think that's a wrap.
Thank
I
you
do want to
guys.
mention that we really need folks, boots on the ground, to canvas. I can't walk, so I'm phone banking. We can set you up with phone banking from home, so you can do it at home. So there's lots of ways you can get involved with the campaign. See maybe Emma over here and sign up. We really need it. It's the 11th hour. Every day counts. Every minute counts.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
guys so much. It's very warm.